The lights of New Kepler Station sparkled like tiny stars through the massive windows of the Terran embassy. Ambassador Kong Woojin stood at the edge of the reception hall, watching alien delegates from 12 different worlds mingle awkwardly around floating tables of food. His black diplomatic suit felt heavy under the artificial gravity, but he kept his shoulders straight and his smile ready. Tonight was important, more important than any meeting he had hosted in his 20 years as an ambassador. The human integration treaty hung in the balance, and most of the alien species in the room had come here to vote against it. They saw humans as too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted with expanded rights in galactic space. The Vorthok delegation is asking about our military presence in the Outer Rim again, said Li Do-yoon, his junior diplomat. She approached him with a data pad in her hands and worry in her dark eyes. And the Helix representatives want to know why human ships carry so many weapons. Kong nodded slowly. The questions were expected but still frustrating. Humans carried weapons because space was dangerous. Pirates, raiders, and worse things lurked in the dark between stars. But explaining this to species who had lived in peace for thousands of years was like explaining color to the blind. Tell them we will address all concerns during the formal session tomorrow, he said. Tonight is about building trust, not debating policy. The reception hall buzzed with the sounds of universal translators working overtime, clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones mixed with standard galactic as delegates tried to communicate. Near the center of the room, the embassy's pride and joy drew the most attention. A zero-gravity pool that floated in a contained field of artificial atmosphere. The pool was a marvel of human engineering. Water hung suspended in a perfect sphere, held in place by gravity generators and force fields. Colored lights danced through the liquid, creating patterns that shifted and changed like living art. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely unique in known space. No other species had thought to create such a thing. Dr. Park Suman stood near the pool, explaining its workings to a group of curious aliens. Her voice carried the excitement of someone who loved her work. As the embassy's chief xenobiologist, she knew more about alien physiology than almost any human alive. Her research had helped design the pool to be safe for multiple species. The water contains a balanced mixture of minerals and gases, she explained to a tall Helix delegate whose tentacles swayed with interest. It can support the breathing needs of 17 different species types. The gravity field can be adjusted from 0.1 to 3 times standard depending on the comfort needs of our guests. Kim Tae-ho watched the demonstration from across the room while checking the gravity generator readings on his tablet. As the embassy's head maintenance engineer, he was responsible for keeping all the fancy equipment running smoothly. The pool was his baby. He had helped design and build it over the past 2 years. Every circuit, every force field projector, every safety system had been tested and retested under his careful eye. The gravity readings looked good. Stable at 1 point to standard, perfect for most species. The Pixians needed lower gravity, but they usually stayed airborne anyway with their gossamer wings. The Vorthok preferred higher gravity, but they were big enough to handle the current setting without problems. Everything was running perfectly. Too perfectly, maybe. Tae-ho had learned not to trust perfect readings. In his 15 years of maintaining complex systems, he had seen too many failures that started with everything looking fine. Near the pool's edge, something caught his attention. A flash of silver and blue, no bigger than his thumb. One of the Pixian delegates had landed on the pool's containment rim. Pixians were tiny beings from the low-gravity moons of the Kepler system. They looked like living jewels with crystalline wings that caught and reflected light in amazing patterns. This one was female. He could tell by the blue tint to her wings. Male Pixians were more silver. She seemed to be studying the water with intense curiosity, her head tilted at an angle that reminded him of a bird watching a worm. Dr. Park noticed her too and moved closer, speaking in the soft tones that worked best with Pixian. The water is perfectly safe for your people. Delia, the mineral content has been adjusted to match your homeworld's requirements. The tiny alien looked up at the human doctor and made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The translator picked up her words a moment later. It is beautiful. We have no such things on our worlds. Water falls as rain or pools in low places. We have never seen it dance in the air like this. Other delegates gathered around to watch the Pixian's reaction. Even the usually gruff Vorthok seemed interested in her wonder at the floating water. This was exactly what Kang had hoped for. Different species, finding common ground in shared amazement, but Tae-ho kept watching his readings. Something was wrong. The gravity field was fluctuating slightly, just tiny variations that most people would never notice. The kind of variations that meant a component was starting to fail. He tapped his tablet, running deeper diagnostics. The main generator looked fine, but one of the backup units was showing stress patterns, not dangerous yet, but concerning. He made a note to replace it after the reception ended. Lyra spread her wings and lifted off from the rim, hovering just above the water's surface. Her wings caught the colored lights from below, creating rainbow patterns that made several delegates gasp in appreciation. She was showing off a little, he realized, performing for her audience like a dancer on stage. The backup generator readings spiked suddenly, just for a second, but enough to make Teho's heart jump. He looked up from his tablet in time to see Lyra wobble in the air as the gravity field fluctuated around her. "Everything all right?" Dr. Park asked, noticing his concerned expression. "Just a minor fluctuation," he said, not wanting to alarm the guests. "Nothing to worry about." But he kept watching both his readings and the tiny alien dancing above the water and space. Minor problems had a way of becoming major disasters very quickly, and tonight, with so much depending on making a good impression, was not the time for technical failures. The gravity field spiked again, stronger this time. Lyra's wings fluttered frantically as she fought to maintain her position in the air. She was too small, too light to fight against the artificial gravity when it went unstable. Teho was already moving before his mind fully processed what was happening. The tiny Pixian was falling toward the water, her wings folded against the sudden increase in gravitational pull. She would hit the surface in seconds, and once her crystalline wings got wet, she would sink like a stone. No one else had time to react. The other delegates were still processing what they were seeing. Dr. Park was reaching for emergency equipment that was too far away. Ambassador Kong was on the other side of the room trying to maintain diplomatic calm even as disaster unfolded. But Teho was close enough to help, close enough to act on the instinct that made humans different from every other species in the galaxy, the instinct to save a life, even if it meant risking your own. Teho did not think, he did not calculate the risks or consider the diplomatic consequences. He saw a tiny being falling toward certain death and his body moved before his mind could interfere. His dress shoes slipped on the polished floor as he launched himself forward, diving headfirst into the floating sphere of water. The shock of the cold water hit him like a physical blow. His formal clothes became heavy weights dragging him down, but he pushed through the sensation and swam toward where Lyra had disappeared beneath the surface. The water was strange, thicker than normal water, with a metallic taste that made his tongue tingle. The special minerals Dr. Park had added to make it safe for alien biology were definitely not designed for human consumption. Around the pool, the reception erupted into chaos. Alien delegates backed away from the water, their translators crackling, with excited voices in a dozen languages. Some species had never seen a human move so quickly. Others had never seen any being risk their life for a complete stranger. "Get emergency medical equipment," Dr. Park shouted to Lee Do-yoon while pulling off her jacket, "and contact the medical bay. Tell them we need a xenobiology specialist here now." Ambassador Kong stood frozen for a moment, watching his carefully planned diplomatic event fall apart. Then his training kicked in and he began moving through the crowd, speaking calmly to delegates, assuring them that everything was under control. Inside, his heart was pounding. If the Pixian died at a human embassy, it would destroy any chance of the integration treaty passing. But his fears were secondary to what was happening in the water. Teho had found Lyra, her tiny form barely visible in his large hands. Her wings were folded against her body, waterlogged and useless. She was not moving, and her usual blue glow had faded to a dim flicker. The engineered water was making it hard for him to breathe. Each gulp burned his throat and made his chest feel tight. The minerals that allowed alien species to extract oxygen from the liquid were poisoning his human lungs. He needed to get to the surface quickly, but he also needed to keep Lyra safe. He remembered something from his engineering training, emergency air pocket creation. If he could trap some air in his jacket, he might be able to create a breathing space for the tiny alien. With one hand holding Lyra carefully, he used the other to pull his jacket off underwater. The wet fabric was heavy and awkward, but he managed to trap a large bubble of air inside it, carefully. He placed Lyra inside the air pocket, making sure her head was above the waterline. The jacket formed a crude but effective life support system, giving the Pixian access to breathable air while protecting her from the mineral-rich water that was slowly poisoning him. Swimming to the surface took forever. His lungs burned and his vision started to blur around the edges. The dress shoes on his feet felt like anchors, and his soaked clothes dragged at him with every stroke. But he kept moving, driven by the knowledge that a life depended on his actions. When he finally broke the surface, gasping and coughing, strong hands reached down to pull him from the water. The Vorthok delegate, despite his people's reputation for coldness, had moved to help. His 4 arms easily lifted both Teho and his precious cargo from the floating pool. The small one, Teho gasped, water streaming from his hair. "Is she alive?" Dr. Park was already there, her emergency medical kit open beside her. With practiced efficiency, she took the improvised air pocket from Teho's hands and gently extracted Lyra. The tiny Pixian was unconscious but breathing, her wings twitching slightly as oxygen reached her system. "She is alive," Dr. Park said, relief clear in her voice, "but she needs immediate treatment. Her wing membranes are damaged from the water exposure, and she may have inhaled some of the mineral solution." As the doctor worked, other delegates gathered around to watch. This was not normal behavior for any species they knew. Most civilizations would have called for professional rescue equipment, or at least debated the proper procedures for intervention. The idea of immediately risking your own life to save a stranger was completely alien to their experience. The Helix delegate, whose tentacles had been swaying with nervousness all evening, moved closer to Teho. Why did you do this thing? The small one is not of your species. She is not even of your world. Why would you risk your life for her? Teho sat on the floor, still coughing up the strange water from his lungs. His expensive formal clothes were ruined, his hair was dripping wet, and his throat felt like he had swallowed fire. But he looked genuinely confused by the question. She was drowning, he said simply. I could not just watch her die. The Helix delegate's tentacles stopped moving, entirely. Around the room, other aliens exchanged glances and whispered conversations. This was not the behavior they had expected from the supposedly aggressive human species of Orthoc warrior, whose people were known for their practical approach to survival, stepped forward. His translator gave his words a grinding mechanical quality. Your action was inefficient. You could have died, then both of you would be lost. Maybe, Teho agreed, trying to stand up on shaky legs, but I could not know that before I tried. I only knew that she needed help and I was close enough to give it. Dr. Park looked up from her patient. Lyra is stable. Her breathing is normal and her wing damage is minimal. She should make a full recovery. She paused, looking at Teho with something like wonder. Your quick thinking with the air pocket saved her life. That was brilliant improvisation. But Teho was not interested in praise. He was looking at the tiny alien in the doctor's hands, watching her chest rise and fall with steady breaths. Relief flooded through him, making his knees weak. She was alive. That was all that mattered. Around them, the diplomatic reception had transformed into something entirely different. Delegates who had come to oppose human expansion were now asking questions about human nature, human behavior, human values. The conversation had shifted from policy to philosophy, from politics to the deeper question of what it meant to be part of a galactic community. And at the center of it all, a maintenance engineer sat dripping wet on the floor, completely unaware that his simple act of compassion had just changed the course of interstellar relations. Dr. Park Suman had never worked on a Pixian before, but her years of xenobiology training kicked in as she carefully examined Lyra. The tiny alien fit completely in her cupped hands. Her crystalline wings spread delicately across the doctor's palms. Each wing was no thicker than paper but stronger than steel when dry. Now they were fragile as wet tissue. I need to get her to the medical bay, Dr. Park said, looking up at Ambassador Kong. She needs specialized equipment to dry her wings properly. If they stay wet too long, they could develop permanent damage. Do whatever is necessary, Kang replied immediately. Then he turned to the crowd of alien delegates. Please, everyone, give the doctor space to work. Our medical facilities are among the best in this sector. Delegate Lyra will receive the finest care possible. But as Dr. Park started to move toward the exit, a clear voice rang out from her hands. Lyra had regained consciousness, and despite her weakness, she was trying to speak. The universal translator caught her words, broadcasting them to the entire room. Wait, she said, her voice like the sound of small bells. I must speak, I must tell them what I saw. Dr. Park stopped walking, concerned about her patient's condition. Delegate Lyra, you need medical attention. Please rest and let me treat your injuries. But the tiny alien was insistent. She struggled to sit up in the doctor's hands, her wings trembling with the effort. No, this is important. They must understand what your human did for me. The room fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the space station's life support systems seemed to quiet as everyone waited to hear what the Pixian would say. Her species was known for their honesty. Pixians could not lie, a biological impossibility that made them valuable as neutral observers in galactic disputes. I was falling, Lyra began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. The gravity field changed and I could not fight it. I knew I would die. In my culture, when death comes, we accept it with dignity. We do not struggle against the inevitable. She paused, looking around the room at all the alien faces watching her. But the human did not accept it. He saw my death approaching and refused to allow it. He threw himself into danger to prevent something that was not his responsibility, not his problem, not his concern. The Vorthok delegate who had helped pull Teho from the water stepped forward. His species valued strength above all else, but he was beginning to understand that humans had a different kind of strength. This human behavior, it is common among your people. Teho, still sitting on the floor and dripping water, looked embarrassed by the attention. I just did what anyone would do, he said quietly. No, said the Helix delegate, her tentacles waving with emphasis. This is not what anyone would do. My people would have called for rescue specialists. The Vorthok would have calculated the risks first. The Xanthari would have held a committee meeting to decide the proper response. You acted without thinking, without planning, without considering your own safety. Li Dayun had been quietly recording the entire conversation on her diplomatic pad. This was exactly the kind of testimony that could change minds in the Galactic Council. She made sure every word was being captured and transmitted to the appropriate officials. Dr. Park finally managed to convince Lyra to accept medical treatment, but the tiny alien insisted on continuing to talk as they moved toward the medical bay. In the water, when I thought I would die, the human created something that should not exist, she said. He made air from nothing, a pocket of life in a place of death. This is not just skill. This is not just training. This is something deeper. As they walked through the embassy corridors, other staff members stopped to watch. Word of the rescue was already spreading through the station's communication networks. By the time they reached the medical bay, a small crowd had gathered outside. Inside the medical facility, Dr. Park worked with quiet efficiency. She used specialized drying equipment designed for delicate alien physiologies, carefully removing the water from Lyra's wings without damaging the crystalline structures. The process took nearly an hour, during which time the Pixian continued to talk about her experience. When I was in that air pocket, I could see his face through the water, she said as the drying equipment hummed around her. He was in pain. The water was hurting him. I could tell. But he did not let go of me. He did not give up. Even when it would have been easier to save himself, he held on. Tejo had changed into dry clothes and was sitting in the medical bay's waiting area. He kept insisting that he felt fine, but Dr. Park had insisted on monitoring him for mineral poisoning from the engineered water. Lee Do-yoon sat beside him, asking gentle questions about his actions. Did you know the water would be dangerous? For you, she asked. I knew it was not designed for humans, he admitted, but I did not think about that at the time. I just saw her falling and knew I had to try to catch her. Were you afraid? Tejo considered this question carefully. I was afraid she would die, he said finally. I was not afraid for myself until later, when my lungs started to burn. But even then, the fear was not as strong as the need to save her. In the main reception hall, Ambassador Kong was dealing with a completely transformed diplomatic situation. The alien delegates who had come to vote against the Human Integration Treaty were now asking entirely different questions. They wanted to understand human psychology, human motivations, human social structures. The Zenthari delegate, whose people were known for their logical approach to all problems, was particularly puzzled. This behavior pattern, is it learned or instinctive? She asked. Both, Kong replied honestly. We teach our children to help others, but the instinct to protect the innocent seems to be built into our species. Even our smallest children will try to help someone who is hurt or in danger. This could be a liability, observed the practical Vorthok delegate. Your people could be manipulated by those who would fake distress to exploit your protective instincts. It has happened, Kang admitted, but we consider the risk acceptable. Better to help 1,000 false alarms than to ignore one real emergency. Back in the medical bay, Dr. Park completed her treatment of Lyra. The tiny alien's wings were fully functional again, shimmering with their natural blue light. She tested them carefully, hovering a few inches above the examination table. Perfect. Recovery, Dr. Park announced with satisfaction. No permanent damage, no complications. You should be able to fly normally within a few hours. Lyra turned to face Tejo, who was finally being released from his own medical monitoring. I owe you my life, she said formally. By the customs of my people, this creates a bond that cannot be broken. You are now considered family to all Pixians. Tejo looked confused. I do not need payment or rewards. I am just glad you are okay. That, said Lyra, is exactly why the bond exists. You ask for nothing, so you deserve everything we can give. As they prepared to return to the reception, none of them realized that their actions had already begun to ripple outward through the galactic communication networks. The story of a human risking his life to save a drowning alien was spreading from station to station, world to world, species to species. The real rescue was just beginning. The news traveled faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours of the rescue, communication networks across 3 sectors were buzzing with the story. Lee Do-yoon sat in her small office, watching her communication panel light up with incoming messages from diplomatic missions, news organizations, and government officials throughout known space. Ambassador, she called to Kang, who was reviewing damage control strategies in his office. The Pixian High Council wants to schedule an emergency session to discuss the incident, and the Helix Foreign Ministry is requesting detailed psychological profiles of human behavior patterns. Kang rubbed his tired eyes. He had been awake for 18 hours straight, fielding calls and managing the diplomatic fallout from what should have been a simple reception. What about the Vorthok Empire? They want to send a cultural study team to observe human colonies, Lee replied, checking her notes. And the Zenthari Federation is asking for copies of our educational curricula to understand how we train our children to behave this way. It was unprecedented. In the 40 years since first contact, alien species had shown polite interest in human culture, but never this level of intense curiosity. The rescue had changed something fundamental in how they viewed humanity. Dr. Park entered the office carrying a datapad full of medical reports and communication logs. I have been monitoring the galactic medical networks, she said. Emergency response teams from 6 different species are requesting information about our first aid procedures. They want to know how Tahoe knew to create that air pocket. Did he know? Kong asked. Or was it just improvisation? I asked him the same question, Dr. Park replied. He said it was basic emergency training that all maintenance workers receive. But when I checked the curriculum, that specific technique is not taught anywhere. He created it on the spot, combining principles from different emergency procedures. In his quarters, Tahoe was trying to understand why everyone was making such a big deal about what he had done. His small apartment was filled with gifts from alien species, crystalline art from the Pixians, scented oils from the Helix delegation, even a ceremonial weapon from the Vorthark Empire. He had never owned so many things, and he did not know what to do with any of them. His communication terminal had been ringing constantly with interview requests from news organizations across the galaxy. He had stopped answering after the 5th call, uncomfortable with the attention and unsure what to say. All he had done was help someone who needed help. Why was that so difficult for everyone to understand? A soft chime announced a visitor at his door. When he opened it, he found Lyra hovering at eye level, her wings creating tiny whirlwinds in the corridor air. She had requested quarters near his, claiming it was for diplomatic convenience, but Tahoe suspected she was still nervous about being alone after her near-death experience. The communications are bothering you, she observed, settling onto his shoulder like a living jewel. Despite her tiny size, Pixians were remarkably perceptive about emotional states. I do not understand why everyone cares so much, he admitted, offering her a drop of sugar water from his finger. Pixians needed regular energy supplements, and he had learned to prepare them after Dr. Park explained their dietary requirements. Because what you did was impossible, Lyra explained, sipping the sweet liquid delicately. Not physically impossible, but culturally impossible. My people have studied galactic civilizations for centuries. Every species has survival instincts that prioritize their own kind over others. Even the most altruistic societies help outsiders only after ensuring their own safety first. That seems selfish, Tahoe said. It seems logical, Lyra corrected. If you die trying to save me, then both of us are lost. The rational response is to call for help and wait for proper equipment. What you did was completely irrational, and that is why it worked. Meanwhile, in the embassy's communications center, Ambassador Kong was dealing with a crisis he had never been trained for. The Galactic Council had moved up the vote on the Human Integration Treaty by 2 weeks, claiming that recent events had created an urgent need for reassessment. Half the species are calling for immediate full integration, Lee reported from her workstation. They want humans to have expanded rescue and medical assistance roles throughout the galaxy. The other half want to study us like laboratory specimens to understand our psychological makeup. And the third half, Kong asked tiredly. The Dominion Coalition is more opposed than ever, Lee said grimly. They claim that human unpredictability makes us dangerous allies. They are arguing that a species that acts without thinking cannot be trusted with important responsibilities. This was the outcome Kong had feared most. The rescue had created a polarized response that could split the galactic community. Species would be forced to choose sides, potentially creating the kind of political instability that led to wars. Communication panel chimed with an incoming priority message. The seal of the Pixian High Council appeared on his screen, followed by the image of their eldest representative. High Counselor Avon was over 300 years old, her wings bearing the silver patina that came with age and wisdom in her species. Ambassador Kong, she said, her voice carrying the authority of a position. We have reached a decision regarding the incident at your embassy. The High Council will address the Galactic Assembly directly about this matter. Kang felt his stomach drop. If the Pixians decided to oppose the treaty because of diplomatic protocol violations, it would be over. Their reputation for absolute honesty made their opinions carry enormous weight in galactic politics. High Counselor, he began carefully. I hope you understand that Engineer Kim acted purely from humanitarian motives, without any consideration of political implications. That, said High Counselor Avon, is exactly what makes his actions so significant. We will be recommending immediate approval of expanded human integration, with additional provisions for human-led emergency response services throughout the galaxy. The communication ended, leaving Kong staring at a blank screen. In amazement, the Pixians, traditionally the most cautious voice in galactic politics, were now advocating for expanded human rights and responsibilities. Over the next several days, the ripple effects continued to spread. Human colonies throughout the galaxy reported visits from alien observers who wanted to study their emergency services, their schools, their hospitals. They were particularly interested in volunteer organizations, groups of humans who helped others without payment or official recognition. Dr. Park found herself giving lectures to xenobiologists from a dozen species about human psychology and social behavior. The rescue response appears to be hardwired into human neurology, she explained to a fascinated audience of alien scientists. Our brain chemistry rewards altruistic behavior with pleasure hormones, making it literally feel good to help others. But what about the risks? Asked a Zenthari researcher. How do humans balance the desire to help with the need for self-preservation? We often do not balance them at all, Dr. Park admitted. In emergency situations, the helping response can override survival instincts entirely. It is not always logical, but it has allowed our species to survive catastrophes that would have destroyed more individually focused civilizations. The questions kept coming, and with each answer, the alien species began to understand that they were dealing with something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans were not just another aggressive species seeking expansion through superior technology or military might. They were something entirely different, a species whose survival strategy was based on protecting others, even at personal cost. As the debates raged in government chambers across the galaxy, Tejo continued his normal routine. He maintained the embassy's systems, fixed broken equipment, and made sure everything ran smoothly. The only difference was that now he had a tiny alien companion who rode on his shoulder and helped him reach small spaces that his human-sized hands could not access. Neither of them realized that their simple friendship was becoming a symbol of hope for millions of beings across the galaxy, who were beginning to believe that the universe might be a kinder place than they had thought possible. 3 weeks after the rescue, Ambassador Kong found himself preparing for the most important diplomatic meeting of his career. The Galactic Council had agreed to hold a special session to reconsider the Human Integration Treaty, and representatives from every major species would be attending. What should have been a routine vote had become a galaxy-wide examination of human nature itself. The council chambers on Central Station were massive, designed to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and environmental needs. Kong took his seat at the human delegation table, flanked by Li Do-yoon and Dr. Park in the observers section. Tejo sat uncomfortably in his best civilian clothes, with Lyra perched on his shoulder like a living badge of honor. Nervous, Dr. Park asked quietly. Terrified, Kang admitted. We are not just voting on a treaty anymore. We are deciding whether humans will be welcomed into the galactic community or forever viewed as dangerous anomalies. The session began, with High Counselor Avon taking the central speaking platform. Her ancient wings caught the light as she addressed the assembly, her words carrying the weight of centuries of Pixian wisdom. Fellow beings, she began, we have gathered to discuss an incident that has forced us to reconsider our understanding of consciousness, civilization, and community. A human being risked his life to save one of our kind, asking nothing in return and expecting no reward. This act has revealed something about the human species that we had not previously recognized. She gestured toward Tejo, who tried to shrink into his seat. Engineer Kim Tejo acted in a manner that our best sociologists would have deemed impossible. He violated every known principle of rational self-preservation to protect a being he had never met, from a species he barely understood, in a situation where failure would have meant his own death. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as representatives from different species discussed this statement among themselves. The Zenthari delegation was particularly animated, their logical minds struggling to process the concept of completely irrational altruism. The Vorthok representative stood to address the council. His massive frame dwarfed the speaking platform as he spoke in his people's characteristically direct manner. The humans' actions were inefficient and dangerous. However, they were also effective. Our war historians have studied human military records and found similar patterns, humans who sacrifice themselves to protect others, even at great tactical cost. This behavior appears to be consistent across their entire species, which makes them unpredictable, interrupted the Dominion Coalition speaker. How can we form alliances with beings who might abandon strategic objectives to save enemy civilians? How do we plan military operations with partners who cannot be relied upon to act rationally? Dr. Park requested permission to address the council. As she walked to the speaking platform, her heart pounded with the knowledge that her words could determine humanity's future in the galaxy. Honored representatives, she began, you are asking the wrong questions. You wonder how to predict human behavior, how to control it, how to use it for your own purposes. But humans are not tools to be wielded. We are partners to be trusted. She activated a holographic display showing statistics from human colonies throughout the galaxy. In the past 50 years, human settlements have responded to over 10,000 emergency situations involving other species, natural disasters, pirate attacks, medical emergencies, technical failures in every case. Humans provided aid without regard for political relationships or economic benefits. The display showed rescue ships diving into solar storms to save Helix vessels, human medics treating wounded Zenthari soldiers during the border conflicts, engineers volunteering to repair Vorthok mining stations after catastrophic failures. Each image told a story of humans putting themselves at risk to help others. You want to understand human psychology? Dr. Park continued, it is simple. We believe that every conscious being has value regardless of species, politics, or personal relationships. When we see someone in need, we help. When we see injustice, we fight it. When we see suffering, we try to heal it. This is not a weakness to be exploited, it is our greatest strength. The Helix delegate rose with a question, but what about conflicts of interest? What happens when helping one species means harming another? Then we find a third option, Dr. Park replied. Humans excel at creative problem-solving because we refuse to accept that someone must suffer. We have ended wars by finding solutions that no one else thought to look for. We have prevented genocides by standing between enemies and forcing them to remember their common interests. We do not always succeed, but we always try. The debate continued for hours. Species after species presented their concerns, their fears, their hopes about human integration into galactic society. Some worried about human unpredictability disrupting careful political balances. Others saw human altruism as a tool that could be used to solve conflicts that had lasted for centuries. Finally, High Counselor Avon called for a recess. During the break, something unexpected happened. Lyra asked to address the council, despite her junior status as a minor diplomatic attaché. As the smallest being ever to speak before the Galactic Assembly, she drew intense attention from the gathered representatives. I died in that pool, she said, her small voice amplified throughout the chamber. For those few seconds underwater, I was dead. My wings were useless, my lungs were full of liquid I could not process, and I was sinking toward the bottom where no one could have reached me. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly. But death did not come. Instead, a human being decided that my life was worth more than his own safety. He created the impossible air where there should have been only water, hope where there should have been only despair, life where there should have been only death. The chamber was completely silent as she continued. You debate whether humans, when it can be trusted with greater responsibility in our community. I submit that the question is backwards. Can we be trusted with the responsibility of having humans as our partners? Are we worthy of their friendship? Do we deserve their protection? When the session resumed, the tone had changed completely. Instead of questioning whether humans should be granted expanded rights, the representatives began discussing how to create frameworks that would allow human virtues to flourish while protecting them from exploitation. The Xanthari delegate proposed the establishment of human-led emergency response teams with galaxy-wide authority. The Vorthok suggested creating mixed-species colonies, where human altruism could be balanced with other species, more practical approaches to problem-solving. Even the Dominion Coalition began to soften their opposition, recognizing that human unpredictability might be exactly what their rigid political system needed. Ambassador Kong watched the proceedings with growing amazement. What had started as a near-diplomatic disaster was becoming the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization, one based not on fear and competition, but on cooperation and mutual support. As the day's session ended, Tejo found himself surrounded by alien representatives who wanted to meet the human who had started it all. They asked him questions about his motivations, his feelings, his plans for the future. His answers were simple and honest, which only made them more powerful. I would do it again, he told a young Xanthari diplomat who asked if he regretted his actions. If I saw someone drowning, I would jump in to save them. That is what it means to be human. Standing nearby, Lyra translated his words into her native language for a group of Pixian observers. But she added something that the universal translators missed, an emotional context that conveyed not just what Tejo had said, but why those words represented everything that made humans special in a galaxy full of remarkable species. The shift had begun, and there would be no going back. 6 months later, the emergency alarm echoed through the corridors of Deep Space Station Harmony. The massive facility, built jointly by 4 different species, was home to over 1 million beings from across the galaxy. Now it was in danger, and the response would test everything that had changed since that night at the Terran Embassy. Captain Kim Min-jan, of the Human Emergency Response Corps, received the distress call while his ship was docked for routine maintenance. A passenger liner carrying 3,000 Xanthari civilians had suffered catastrophic engine failure in the neutral zone. Far from any military assistance, pirates were closing in, drawn by the disabled ship's valuable cargo. Estimated arrival time, he asked his mixed-species crew as they prepared for emergency launch. 18 hours at maximum speed, replied his Vorthok engineer. But the pirates will reach them in 12. Then we go faster than maximum, Min-jun said simply. His crew did not question the order. In the months since the human integration treaty had passed with unanimous approval, mixed-species teams had become common throughout the galaxy. Each species contributed their strengths: Vorthok engineering, Helix intuition, Xanthari logic, Pixian precision, and human determination. As their ship raced through hyperspace, emergency teams from 6 different species were already mobilizing. The Galactic Emergency Response Network, created as part of the expanded treaty, had transformed how the galaxy handled crises. No longer did each species respond only to their own kind. Now whoever was closest and best equipped responded first, regardless of politics or species loyalty. On Deep Space Station Harmony, Tejo was training a new group of mixed-species engineers. When the emergency broadcast reached them, he had become something of a celebrity in engineering circles. Not for his rescue of Lyra, but for his innovations in emergency equipment design. His improvised air pocket technique had been refined into a standard piece of rescue gear carried by every emergency responder in the galaxy. Professor Kim said, one of his Helix students, using the title he still felt uncomfortable wearing. "The passenger liner, it is from my home system. My cousin might be aboard." Taeho looked at the young alien's anxious expression and made a decision that would have surprised no one who knew him. "Then we go help," he said, shutting down the training simulation. Emergency protocols override everything else. Within minutes his class had been transformed into a volunteer rescue team. This too had become normal in the months since the treaty. Humans had introduced the concept of civilian emergency volunteers to galactic society, and it had spread like wildfire among species who had never considered that ordinary beings could make extraordinary differences. Meanwhile, on Central Station, the Galactic Council was monitoring the crisis with unprecedented cooperation. High Counselor Avon, now serving as Director of Emergency Coordination, watched the response unfold with satisfaction. The network they had built was performing exactly as designed. 17 ships responding, reported her aide, a young human named Lee Do-yoon, who had transferred from the diplomatic corps to emergency management, mixed crews, optimal equipment, distribution, estimated rescue completion within 6 hours of first contact, and the pirates' 3 human vessels are moving to intercept, Lee replied. They are broadcasting surrender demands in 8 languages, and promising safe passage to any pirates who abandon their attack. This was perhaps the strangest development of all. Human military forces, when given expanded authority, had begun offering clemency to enemies who surrendered before committing crimes. The policy had been controversial at first, but its effectiveness was undeniable. Piracy rates had dropped by 60% as criminals realized they could escape punishment simply by walking away from planned attacks back in space. Captain Min-chun's ship dropped out of hyperspace to find chaos. The disabled passenger liner was surrounded by 5 pirate vessels, their weapons powered but not yet firing. The pirates seemed to be debating among themselves, possibly considering the surrender offer that was being broadcast on all emergency frequencies. "This is Captain Kim Min-jun of the Human Emergency Response Corps," he transmitted on open channels. "We are here to assist the disabled civilian vessel. Any hostile actions against civilians will be considered acts of terrorism under galactic emergency law." The response came from the lead pirate ship, its captain speaking in accented standard galactic. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered 5-1. Withdraw and we will allow you to live." "Counteroffer," Min-jun replied calmly. "Surrender now and we will provide you with safe passage to the nearest neutral station. Continue this attack and face the consequences." What happened next had become typical of human military encounters. Instead of immediately opening fire, Min-chun's ship began rescue operations while simultaneously preparing for battle. His crew launched emergency pods toward the disabled liner while his weapons officer targeted the pirate vessels' engines rather than their command sections. The pirates, expecting a conventional military response, were confused by this dual approach. They had planned to use the civilian ship as a human shield, but the rescue ships were already evacuating passengers regardless of the tactical situation. "Sir," reported his Zenthari tactical officer, "the pirates are powering down weapons on 2 vessels. They appear to be accepting the surrender offer." "Confirmed," added the Vorthok engineer. 3 ships are maintaining hostile posture, but their formations suggest defensive rather than offensive intent. This was the new reality of galactic conflict. The presence of human forces had introduced concepts like mercy, redemption, and second chances to species that had previously operated on purely survival-based logic. Not every pirate chose surrender, but enough did to fundamentally change the nature of space combat. The rescue operation proceeded with clockwork efficiency. Taeho's volunteer team arrived in a converted cargo hauler, their improvised equipment working alongside military-grade rescue gear. His Helix student found her cousin among the evacuees, tears of relief streaming down her tentacles as she embraced the rescued Zen. "How many?" Taeho asked Min-jun as the last evacuation pod docked with their ship. "All of them," the captain replied with satisfaction. 3,000 passengers, 800 crew members, all safe, 0 casualties. This too had become normal. Human-led rescue operations had achieved a safety record that other species considered impossible. The combination of human determination, alien expertise, and universal cooperation had created emergency response capabilities beyond anything previously imagined. As the rescued passengers were transferred to safety, something remarkable happened aboard the rescue ships. Beings from dozens of species worked together to provide comfort, medical care, and emotional support to the survivors. Zenthari logistics officers coordinated with Helix counselors and Vorthok engineers while human medics treated patients regardless of their biology. Lyra, now serving as a liaison officer between human and Pixian emergency services, fluttered between groups of survivors, her presence somehow comforting to beings many times her size. She had grown from a minor diplomatic attach into one of the galaxy's most respected voices on interspecies cooperation. The psychological impact is as important as the physical rescue, she explained to a group of newly trained responders. When beings see that others care enough to risk their lives for strangers, it changes their fundamental understanding of what civilization means. The pirate vessels that had surrendered were escorted to a neutral station where they would face rehabilitation rather than punishment. This controversial policy had been championed by human representatives who argued that most criminals could be reformed given proper opportunities. The results spoke for themselves. Recidivism rates among reformed pirates had dropped to less than 5% later. Aboard Deep Space Station Harmony, the rescued passengers attended a ceremony honoring their rescuers. Ambassador Kong, now serving as Director of Interspecies Relations, watched with pride as humans and aliens stood together receiving commendations for their service. 1 year ago, he told the assembled crowd, we nearly failed to achieve basic diplomatic recognition for humanity. Today, humans serve alongside 11 different species in emergency response, law enforcement, medical services, and education. We have become not just members of the galactic community, but guardians of its highest values. In the audience, Tejo listened uncomfortably to the praise. He had never gotten used to being called a hero, especially when he was surrounded by beings who performed acts of courage and compassion every day. Beside him, Lyra squeezed his finger with her tiny hand, understanding his discomfort. You started something that day in the pool, she whispered. Not just my rescue, but a new way of thinking about what it means to be alive in this galaxy. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of a new initiative, the Galactic Peace Corps, a volunteer organization that would send mixed-species teams to areas of conflict or disaster throughout known space. Membership was open to all species, but the organization would be structured around human principles of selfless service and universal compassion. That night, as Tejo performed his routine maintenance checks on the station's systems, he reflected on how much had changed. The same gravity generators he had worried about during that diplomatic reception now powered emergency response equipment throughout the galaxy. The pool where Lyra had nearly drowned had become a symbol of the cooperation possible between species. Most importantly, the question that had driven the original diplomatic crisis had been answered definitively. Humans were not too unpredictable or too dangerous to be trusted with responsibility in galactic society. They were exactly what the galaxy needed: beings who would dive into unknown waters to save a drowning stranger, no matter the cost to themselves. As he completed his rounds, Tejo found Lyra waiting for him in their usual meeting spot near the observation deck. She had grown slightly in the past year, though she was still small enough to perch on his shoulder. Together they looked out at the stars, where human ships worked alongside alien vessels to keep the galaxy safe. Do you ever regret it? She asked. That moment when you jumped into the pool. Your life became so complicated afterward. Tejo considered the question seriously. His quiet life as a maintenance engineer had indeed become complicated. He was now a professor, a designer, a symbol, and a reluctant celebrity. But when he looked at the mixed-species crews training in the docking bays below, when he saw former enemies working together to save lives, when he received messages from beings across the galaxy telling him how human compassion had changed their worlds, he knew the answer. I would do it again, he said simply. Every time. And in a galaxy that had learned to value compassion over conquest, cooperation over competition, and hope over fear, that simple statement represented the most profound truth of all. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change the entire universe. The rescue in the pool had ended. The transformation of galactic civilization was just beginning.